Everyone, thank you for joining this Xoogler community meetup that we decided to open up to non-Xooglers as well. So glad a friend of mine, Sarah Karam, decided to put this presentation together. We got to meet each other as she was working with startups as well as larger companies on the Google Play team. My role at Google was a team called Project Sandhill, working across different Google products and partnering with folks like Sarah to work with startup founders. Back then was with Coinbase, Lyft, MyFitnessPal. A lot of fun. That's how I started the ex-Google community for everyone to help each other, similar to how we were helping founders. And when we were chatting, Sarah and I, when we were saying how could we be working together to help ex-Googlers, we said this will be actually a very session given what has happened most recently. Today is the 5th of November, but a few weeks ago there was more folks impacted at Google, and also there was a big announcement of folks impacted at Amazon. So we this opportunity for folks to get assistance. We can reach out to me, Chris at e.ai, if you want more talks like what Sarah is presenting, or also forming communities that could help each other, like we've done with Xoogler. So Sarah had an amazing career, 12 years at Google, finished up as a managing director of apps partnerships on Google Play. She just finished last month, I guess, a few days ago, Sarah. And this is a great opportunity for her to actually explain more and help so many folks. And as I mentioned earlier, she's helped me when I was at Google. We stayed in touch, and that's why I know she can also provide a lot of assistance with what she's doing now. So Sarah, without further ado, please introduce yourself and what you're covered today, and perhaps also what you're doing post-Google yourself. Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for the kind intro, and just huge congrats on Key. I know many of the people on this call are benefiting. I loved using it for this event, so just kudos on what you've built. It was really seamless and better than some other products out there. So huge congrats, and thank you for investing in the community. So thank you for the introduction. I think Chris covered me a little bit. I'll share just a couple of seconds of context, and then I'll jump into it. So I was at Google for 12 years, like Chris mentioned. I worked on lots of different products while I was there, primarily Google Play and platforms and devices. That was the bulk of my time. And prior to Google, I was at startups for 5 years. So yeah, lots of wonderful memories. I love my time at Google, but like many, it wasn't my calling. I love my job, but the last few years, I started coaching first at Google, just as a Google coach, but then I started getting certified and taking courses on the side, and then started my own practice as a side job for a few years before leaving a few weeks ago to do this full time. So still getting my land feet after swimming in the water for so long in a corporate life, but loving it. And really where I get a lot of energy from this is helping leaders who are struggling to feel like they're the captain of their ship and feel more like they're a passenger. I think that's a feeling that I can relate to, and I think many others can. And actually going through a layoff can, I think, often feel like that it's you lose that sense of control. And so how do you get it back? How do you feel like you're really the captain of your ship, that you're figuring out what's next, and you're doing that with passion and with purpose? So that's where I get a lot of joy. And I primarily do that with VPs, C-suite at startups and at Google as well. So I'm loving my new chapter, but it's certainly figuring life out. So I want to start with a quick interactive check-in with all of you. We have people here from all over the world. I can see faces, some familiar faces, but a lot of people I don't know, but I know you're all joining from the US, from Singapore, India, UK, lots of time zones. So I know it's a different time for each of you, but one of my favorite movies is Inside Out. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it really resonated with me. And I think it does tell the story of how we have these multitudes of emotions in us, and we can often tell ourselves to suppress the bad ones, whatever that means. But that can be really harmful, actually, to our well-being, to how we regulate ourselves, how we move forward in tough times. So if you'll bear with me, and I'll go first, like if you could just type in the chat, just share like what emotion are you feeling right now? I color coded this per the movie. So if you'd rather just share the color, feel free. But it can be really helpful during times of lack of control and a feeling of crisis to get better at naming your emotions and building that muscle. So I'll share. I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety because I'm not very comfortable presenting in front of large groups of people. It's never been my favorite thing. And a bit of embarrassment. I had a root canal operation this morning, and like this side of my face is still kind of numb. So I feel a bit more self-conscious than usual on my pronunciation and just, I don't know how I'm showing up, which is entirely in my head. I don't think it's necessarily in anyone else's, but yeah, so those are the emotions I'm feeling. I'd love if others can share. Perplexed, love it. Yeah, others, if you could just type in an emotion that you're feeling. Thank you. Thanks, HP. And it can be anything. Please don't be shy. Confused, curious, love it. There's no wrong answer here, clearly. Love it. You know what's interesting, Terry? Anxiety and joy, there's actually a link between the two of those, that apparently it's a lot of the same indicators, like physical indicators between the two. So it can often be scary. Like when we're happy, we can look like we're anxious and vice versa. Anxiety, sadness. Yeah. My favorite character in the movie is probably sadness. Excitement, anxiety, love it. Seeing a lot of anxiety relief is interesting. I like hearing that. Embarrassment. I feel you, Fang. Fear. Yep. Cautious exuberance. Beautiful, beautifully put. Uncertain, anxiety, excitement, and a small mix of all the others. I love it, Steve. Amazing. Yeah, please keep sharing them. I love that you're all being quite nuanced here in your emotions too. And often there's more than one, which is very, very common. And so I do think this is a good practice, by the way. When you're laid off, when you're in that process of figuring out what's next for you, it can feel like a roller coaster. All these emotions can be happening in your body and brain hourly, daily, weekly, and going from sadness to joy to fear to ennui to anxiety within seconds. So the more you can see where you're at, it will help you decide how to move forward. And we'll get into this, but if an emotion is controlling you, and therefore you are rage applying on LinkedIn to a bunch of jobs, it might not be your best work. It might not be the best version of yourself that you're putting out there. So if you can just take a beat and recognize what emotion you're feeling and what that's leading you to do, it can really be a valuable skill. And it is a skill, I will acknowledge, and something that I've been noticing through my coaching, through myself. It's not something we're born able to do. It's something that is learned. So just to ground ourselves in a post-layoff world, I think for people on this call, not everyone, it sounds like, was affected by a layoff from the comments. Most of you were, but some sounds like it may have happened years ago, or it may have been through a different circumstance that you left your job or you're thinking of leaving your job. But I will acknowledge the layoff feelings here for those of you that were laid off, that it can be a whole roller coaster of feelings. And so starting with just depersonalizing it. Layoffs are a corporate decision. It is not about you. And knowing that it's not about your personal self-worth and your performance is really critical. It's easy to say those words. It's easy for me to say those words. It's hard to feel that, but it's so critical because it can really get you in a tailspin if it becomes, what did I do wrong? What are the 5 things that happened in the last 10 weeks that I need to pinpoint? Absolutely not going to be a good use of your time, nor is it accurate. So really grounding yourself in that feeling, and just validating, like we did a second ago, that you're going to have a whole bunch of different feelings: shame, fear, anxiety, sadness. It's a loss. It's a big loss. I mentioned that I just left Google after 12 years as of a few weeks ago. Even if it was my decision, it doesn't make it any less of a loss. You kind of feel that routine that you've built up for so long of going to the office, or seeing the same people, seeing the same emails, the same meetings, and they just disappear overnight. So it is a big loss, and it comes with all the same feelings you would get with any other loss. So just acknowledging that, letting yourself feel it, and realizing it's not going to feel like that forever, but there is going to be stages of that grief. And focusing on what you can control, so critical, because we cannot go back in time. We cannot replay, what should I have done differently? Should I have spent more time with this person or less time on this project, whatever it is. But you can control how you move forward. And in times of crisis, any kind of feeling of uncertainty, having a sense of control daily, even if it's fictitious, right? We don't control everything in this world. We don't control much, but having that sense can be really powerful. So how can you have that space around you and moving forward that you can control, and spend less time ruminating on what you can't control. And this came up in some of the feedback before the session. Ask questions around, like, how do I talk about this to my friends, to my family, to my future employers? And this is personal, so I won't say it's not a one size fits all, but I do highly recommend it is something you own your narrative. You don't kind of keep it secret, hidden, and then assume people won't know, because it will be clear at some point. It will be known, whether you want it to or not. So it's powerful if you can own that narrative versus letting it be owned by others. For friends and family, one thing I've noticed for people I've coached on this topic, it can really be powerful for you to be clear on what you need in the moment. Some people might assume you want to talk about being laid off all the time, or might want to talk about networking, might want to talk about a job search. You might not want to. You might want to reconnect with a friend, not in that capacity. So being clear that, like, I actually want a distraction. I don't want to talk about that right now with family or friends can be really powerful. And same with family. You're likely going to have some anxiety that, oh, I have to show up for my family. I have to provide, to perform, whatever it is, because of all those pressures that we put on ourselves. So how can you show that you are taking it seriously? It's a tough situation, but you need support. And what do you need support with? Being as specific as you can, and don't underestimate the power of naming the things you need and not assuming that people are reading your mind. And for future employers, somebody asked in some of the questions in the survey ahead of time, how this has changed over the years. And I will say, in my observation from clients I coach, it's, for better or for worse, layoffs have become a lot more common than they were 5 years ago. So, or at least more frequent and common in the tech industry. Therefore, it's actually far less of a stigma than it used to be. So I would say it's actually better to lead with that reality that you were impacted due to whatever org change or whatever change happened in your business, and you're proud of the contributions you made there, and you're excited for your new role where you'll get to build on those and use some of the strengths to deliver impact. And we'll get into the framing in a second of how can you write that story even more crisply. But just to answer that question of how do you talk about it, I always vote for just being honest and candid, but actually owning a clear narrative versus a more negative narrative. And we talked a bit about the natural feelings of shame, of loss, because it is a loss. One thing I find really valuable about not being associated with a company for at least for a time frame, it might not last forever, is that it can be armor we wear, or like a helmet we wear, to say, if somebody asks you, hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. You usually start with your name, maybe where you're from. This looks a bit different everywhere in the world. Sometimes it'll get into like, where's your what village are you from, or whatever. That's how it is in Lebanon. But then it often gets to, where do you work? And that is such a high level of identity for us in capitalist society. It can feel really jarring to take it away, right? It's almost like, where do you work? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that question, and it can get very awkward. So how will you shift your identity in meeting new people, or people that you haven't met in a while, with this change? And I actually think it can be incredibly freeing if you drop all the logos from your shirt, and you're no longer, I work at Google, I work at Amazon, I work at Uber. Now, of course, you used to, so you still have those sub-identities. They don't disappear. Like Chris mentioned, like, this is the whole point of the community that he's built and that he's helping other companies build, and it's a beautiful thing. But how might you not make that your primary identity? Or like, what other identities do you have? We all have multitudes, right? You might be a parent, you might be a golf lover, a traveler, a scuba diver, whatever it is. And none of those need to define you by any means, but how can you build a more full identity of who you are, and not have to feel like you're hiding behind that helmet, because that does create some distance. If that's your primary identity and you're just in a helmet, it can make you more of a commodity, right? And less of a unique individual who can bring a lot of value to others or to other organizations. So just an invitation to, maybe, even if you do go work at another big company within the next few months, how might you invite yourself to not make that your primary identity? Because it can be obviously a high risk, but also, create distance with others. And I'm going to talk about, you're going to hear me say this a lot, but, crisis, a mode of crisis where you're in that fear, fight or flight, state, which a layoff can often induce, can have its big silver linings. And one of them is that opportunity to actually proactively take a shift down in how you're thinking about your priorities, your life. I love this word. It's from another coach, Steve Schlafman, that downshifting is really asking yourself, are you racing full throttle ahead towards your thing? Or is it a life that others have predetermined for you, or you've predetermined as a way to look successful to the world around you, and really not shying away from asking yourself those questions. The control key and the shift key, not to be I'm not necessarily a Mac enthusiast, but on any keyboard are close together. And asking yourself, let me take my finger off the control key and actually just take a little bit of a shift and ask, is this serving me? Am I living a life that belongs to me or someone else? It's a powerful time to do that. And I'll walk through some ways you can do that. But it is absolutely a blessing to have a bit of a space in time to do that, because it's not, I can tell you, it doesn't come often in life. And usually it's for reasons we did not choose. So never let a crisis go to waste. And so on that note, question that also has come up, should I find a job immediately? And I can bet those of you that were impacted through a layoff, that is your first instinct of that need. Again, back to like a crisis usually makes us feel like we need control, that we need to find some sense of security. How might I find a new job as quickly as possible? Because that will give me a sense of security and control. So that may be an instinct. I would highly encourage all of you to think about these 3 stages of how you get to finding a new job. First, knowing thyself. And we'll talk through these. What do you want? What are your goals? Why? Future employers, people they will see through you if you don't have good answers to that. If it's simply, I need a new job because I want a new job, but I don't know why, I don't know what I care about, it's going to make you far less appealing as a hire, because you don't have that sense of grounding of why this matters to you. So knowing yourself, knowing your desires, your goals, and why they matter to you is step number 1. Knowing others, and you'll notice these overlap, because you don't need to do this in a vacuum. Knowing yourself, often we actually don't have the best image of ourselves. We can be very self-critical, harsher about ourselves than our loved ones can be about ourselves. So how might you work with others to know yourself and get a mirror from other people around what are you really good at? What do they think you love doing based on their observations of you? And this can be a really powerful source of 360 of, do I know myself and do others give me more data on myself? And knowing others is a really critical way to find a new job. You're spending time with others around you in your network, outside of your network, getting to know them more deeply, learning from them, exchanging ideas and values. And we'll talk about what that can look like. That's going to be your path to your next job, your next exciting project. So how do you invest time in that versus cold applying on job boards, which is typically not going to yield the same level of results? And then telling your story. This is different from knowing yourself. So knowing yourself is very introspective. You there, understanding yourself, listening to others, exchanging. But it's very different from how do you communicate yourself to others and your goals, what you're good at. And that is an art in itself. And it's often quite anxiety-inducing for many people who are not natural peacock feather people who are very confident talking about themselves. Some of you might be on this call. I will say most people I've worked with in coaching and at Google, that's not a comfort zone for them. They don't like talking about themselves. They're very comfortable talking about others, about their team members, about their family. But when it comes to ourselves, it can be a lot more vulnerable to talk about what we're good at, what we're looking for. So practicing that is going to be critical, because if you can't nail that, it's going to be really hard for you to come across with your story and your goals to your potential future employer. So all of these interweave, and it's not linear. And by the way, some of these are lifelong journeys. It's not like you're done knowing yourself after a month, but there's certainly a foundation level that is super important to have before you start going out there and looking for roles. But this could take weeks, it could take months, it could take hours. It's really up to you. Hours might be a bit unrealistic, but it's certainly not something that needs to take 12 months, but it certainly is a worthwhile way to think about how do you prepare yourself for looking for a job and for landing a job. So let's talk through these, and then I want to spend some time talking about the world we're in today, because that's come up a lot in the questions from the group, thinking about what is it like to be in the job market in 2025 versus in 2020 or 2015, and it is different, and we'll talk about that because it is more complex in so many ways. But these fundamentals still apply, I would say, because if you don't know yourself, no time period is going to be easy on you. So knowing thyself, what does that really mean? And this is in the career context. I'm not a therapist. I'm not talking about, the Socratic know thyself and kind of the meaning of life way, but just from a perspective of what do you want? What do you want from your work time? And that is the majority of your waking hours. And I love this Charlie Munger quote because it's something that I think most of us try to spend our time on what we want, right? What are the things I want in a new job? Do I want a great manager? Do I want flexible hours? Do I want a certain title? And we spend less time on what we want to avoid. So I'd say the first thing is to have your priorities ready and critically to rank them. There is no world in which you get a job where all of your top priorities are equally perfectly met. That is very unrealistic. If you have those jobs, please share them, because that's wonderful to hear that and you're very lucky if you're able to land a job that has so many of your top priorities, but there's usually going to be something you have to sacrifice or compromise. And that's okay. It doesn't mean it's not going to be an incredible experience, but ranking your priorities is going to be critical. So that list of your priorities could be 1 page, it could be 3 pages. It doesn't need to be limited. I would encourage you to make it expansive, but the most critical thing is that it's ranked, because you need to know if, for example, flexible hours is such a common one I hear, that a lot of people would get nervous to work at a company that doesn't allow them to work when they want, or even remote, etc. But for some people, that's actually, they're open to changing that. If it's the right manager, the right project, the right salary, they're able. So ask yourself those questions. What am I willing to rank higher and lower here? And this ties to the deal breakers. That's a totally different process from what are my absolute deal breakers. And there's no job out there that will get me to break these rules for myself. And that could be, travel, time zone, remote versus in office. And often, again, doesn't mean that these are always non-negotiable. The third part here is being able to be adaptive. Oh, good question. So sorry, I'm reading the Vikram's question. I would recommend not ranking the deal breakers, Vikram, because in my mind they're binary. If it's on this list, it is a yes or no. There's no the first deal breaker versus the second. And actually, the opposite approach I would take here versus your priorities is to not make this list expansive. If this is more than 2 or 3 things, you're going to have a hard time because you've got too many kind of totally non-negotiable things. So to keep this list tight, it shouldn't be 0 things. I think that's actually also a red flag to me. If you have nothing that's a non-negotiable, as an employer, I might think you have no sense of boundaries, which you're going to bring into the workplace, and then you're going to have no boundaries for the company. So I do think having at least 1 thing that you are pretty sure and you have a clear reason why it's a non-negotiable for you can really help, obviously, in your search and narrowing down what you're looking at, but also for yourself when you're getting closer to signing an employment contract, that you're not going to hate yourself in a year or lose, and you'll end up really disliking the job because you've said yes to something that you clearly don't want to stomach. But then the last thing I'll say here, and this is critical in this market, adaptability is such a highly important trait. So not to say you should give up your non-negotiables, and of course it depends on what they are, because some things are a little bit more. They might change with life stage, or they might change with your own perspective. Some things might never change. Some of you, I'm in this boat, don't want to work for a toxic manager. I don't care how much I'm getting paid. I don't want to work for somebody who's just really obnoxious, who I don't respect. So that to me there's just nothing that will change that. No amount of time or cool AI tech, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to be okay with that. You might have other things on that list, like hours or time zone, that maybe you're open to shifting depending on certain things. So you can still have them on the non-negotiables list, but they might be adaptable. So staying adaptable, listening to the market, listening to the people in your network that you talk to, can help you keep refining your priority stack rank and then your non-negotiable list. But I would start here. Having those 2 lists will really help make sure you're not drowning in options and feeling like, oh, I guess every job is an option for me. I'm happy to be anything. I think that can also be very dangerous and overwhelming, and frankly, not realistic, because it's going to make your job search very untenable. Yeah, I totally agree with that, Vikram, that market signals are hard to read. And I think when I say to adapt to the market, more as a way of saying, if you've been in the market for, I'm going to pick a number, 18 months, and you've had your priorities and you've had your non-negotiables, and you're struggling to find roles that meet both, that's where I would ask, why? What's missing between what you're having on your list and what's out there? are you being too unrealistic, or are there no jobs that meet all these requirements that are in your space, in your industry, and to talk to your network about that, and to be upfront and ask questions. So that's what I mean by listening to the market. I don't mean like reading the news. I mean talking to individuals in that niche that you're, or in that industry that you're seeking to work in. So then, the two other pills in that chart. So first, know thyself, know others, and tell your story. And I purposely put these together because they're very interconnected. And what I mean by that is, as you know others, you're talking to people, you're meeting new people. And how are you going to talk about you? The work you do, what you're great at, what you're excited about, having that prepared as you have these discussions and building on it and working on it. It's never one and done. It's not something you're going to wake up one day and say, oh, I'm done. I have my story. I can now talk to people. That's not how it works. You're going to iterate. You're going to test narratives about your work, about what you're excited about, and keep refining it. But these two definitely go together. I have this stat here, and this is based on some market research. I would say there isn't a ton of research on this, but what I've seen, and this has definitely been the experience of clients I've coached as well as myself, 80% of jobs are landed through networking. 2% are through going on LinkedIn or whatever and clicking apply. That is not a common path unless it's augmented with network. So your network is your most valuable tool here. And it could be that you're not quite tapping into it. You might already be tapping into it and you might feel great about it. You might feel like, well, I don't have the right network to find a new job. And I would definitely encourage everyone who's in that mindset to be a bit more expansive and like, what do we even mean by network? Network doesn't mean, the people you worked with exclusively, or your manager only, or people very well. It's really kind of the nodes, right? The web around us of people who we know, and then who they know, who we can find connective tissue with. But it does take a ton of work. I really hate the word networking. It's not my favorite because it has so many negative connotations. But I do think the act of meeting people and sharing ideas and exchanging is the most human thing we can all do, right? Like it's kind of in our DNA as humans, and we've evolved that way. So if you think of it more like that versus this transactional, I have to go to events and put my name tag and like, be very on or whatever. I think that's not how authentic connections are built with that mindset. That mindset can be quite toxic. I think the more effective mindset is, how do I just learn and enjoy time with people? And just, invest my time that way. And that is really going to be the way you find a new job. It's not going to be sitting behind your computer, typing away. So with that in mind, how do you do it? What does it mean to invest in your network and know others? And I start with thinking about who are the people around you who you might not be obvious choices for people for you to meet up with and invest more time with. And do you have common values or areas of value? And I'll give an example. I think often when we're in a workplace, our colleagues may or may not be people we have shared values around. We obviously work in the same place, so that's like already a shared value. We have the mission of whatever company we're in has inspired us, the work, all of that. So there already is some commonality, but there might not be enough there to keep us tightly bound for years to come. And I think there might be with some, but probably not with everybody. So how might you look at spaces that you might not commonly look at as a job search mindset? People at your parents at your kids' school, if you have kids, or people through your alumni associations from university, or people from shared hobbies, like if you play sports or any other activity outside of kind of corporate work. Like what are other places you might know people who actually might have some shared interests and values that you can build that foundation, but you actually have very different perspectives. And this is key here, because I think actually meeting with people who are just like you, who have the same values, work at the same companies, that you're a product manager, they're a product manager, it can actually be a little less valuable from a job search perspective to spend the bulk of your time with people who have a very similar profile to you, because there isn't that complementary exchange. I'm not saying you shouldn't hang out with your friends, by the way. Please don't take it like that. If you have close friends who are similar to you, wonderful. But just purely from a mindset of, I want to look for a new opportunity out there, different perspectives can be really valuable. So, for example, do you have a friend who's worked exclusively in startups, has never worked in big tech, but you have that big tech perspective? That is a really valuable exchange, because they don't know what Google and Amazon and others are going through right now. So how can you bring that perspective, and vice versa? Maybe you work in gaming. and you have some friend who doesn't work in gaming, who works in, manufacturing or OEMs or carriers. It doesn't mean you have to only think in this manner, but it can be really valuable to have those shared perspectives because it's an exchange, which is the second point here that I hear so much from clients I coach, from friends that who, especially those who don't work in a partner-facing role. So like Chris mentioned, we worked together at Google. We were both in partner-facing roles. So I was in BD. And so this part of the presentation is very much like something I think about a lot and I take a lot of pride in because it is my job, right? Or it has been my job for many years to think about relationships and how to build more effective relationships. For many of you, that wasn't really your job. I mean, obviously everyone has to do that, but it wasn't a core component of your role. So often for many people, especially people who haven't had to do this as a job, I feel this, I hear the concern of it's transactional. Like, I don't want to reach out to this person because they're going to see me as, oh, I'm asking for a favor, and it's going to suck, and they're going to think I'm very transactional, and they're going to hate me. So it's kind of this, spiral. And in my experience, both as a recipient, but also as the outreacher, I do think it can be transactional if it's positioned that way, very much like, hey, I need this from you, do it, right? Obviously, that is the nature of a transaction. I think what we actually do value, we don't value that as humans, or we don't see that as a connection. We see that as very much a one and done. We do value exchange. And there's a big difference between a transaction and an exchange. And an exchange, it's mutual, right? So what are you bringing to the table to this person in terms of your insight, your learnings, your excitement for what they work on, and what you want to hear more about what they do, what they've been working on these past few months, and then what can they share with you in the reverse on what they're doing. And I wouldn't, again, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to somebody and asking for a favor, especially if you have that foundation. That will happen, and that should happen when you're looking for a job, like we talked about before, especially in your friends and family circle. But making sure you're not negotiating with yourself on preventing yourself from reaching out to people you might not feel that comfortable reaching out to because you think it'll be viewed a certain way, and instead seeing it as like humans crave connection. And people want to meet with people they think are interesting, or especially if they're introduced by someone they know well. So to not put too much pressure on yourself, I see that a lot, and especially not to stereotype, but a lot of Googlers. So making sure you're not just too hard on yourself. Yeah, that's a great question, Vikram. Let me come back to that one if you don't mind. But I think it's an excellent question about interview strategy. And then the last one, and we'll go through this very quickly. What is your narrative? How are you going to come to these discussions with people, whether or not you've known them for years or they're brand new contacts? There's still a need for you to have a crisp narrative on what have you been doing for the past few years, especially if you haven't been in close contact with them for that long. So what are the problems you solved? I think a mistake I see a lot of people do is they start with their job title. I was a program manager at Meta working on, whatever, the glasses. Like, okay, great. Like, I don't know what you did though. Like, what does that even mean? And I think most people, even if you work in tech, that is far less memorable and helpful information than like, I was at Meta and we were having this really big challenge where we could not figure out how to manufacture the glasses at scale in a privacy compliant manner. And we were struggling with Ray-Ban. And so here's what I did. I figured out this strategy here. I built a new approach. And I worked with these two teams who hated each other in the beginning because they were, whatever, there was some reason. And then I brought them together in this way. And obviously I'm saying it in a very long-winded way, and there's a way to refine that. But that is the more fascinating and useful way to describe what you did versus your title, the team you worked on, the product you worked on. And I wouldn't take that for granted, because often, we spend less time on that introduction or that summary and more time on the job you want to get, but actually telling your story in a really crisp way is going to really help you when you're having these meetings with people that you know well, or you don't know that well. And I want to spend a few minutes, and then I'll make sure we open up to questions quickly. Oh, this is, yeah. And I'm going to, so you know what, actually, just for the sake of time, I'm going to come back to all the chat questions at the end, if that's okay, unless they're like real time, because I want to get to them, but I also want to make sure we leave time for them. So in this new world, where we're learning about what AI can do every day in new different ways. And there's new applications happening every day. And employers know that. So employers are hedging their bets and figuring out what roles do I actually really need to hire and what roles should I not hire anymore, because I don't need a human to do that anymore. It can add another layer of it does add another layer of uncertainty, of anxiety, and of that like need to control, right? Because there's even more out of our control than there's ever been when it comes to the job market. So how do you navigate it? And I'll just share three tips that I found useful. And I do think it is, it's less about, you'll see, it's less about AI, more about how do you think a little differently about the long term here. So I already mentioned shifting from the mindset of your job title to the problems you solve. This is incredibly important now, because again, there are many companies, and I coach some CEOs, some senior people at startups. They have stopped hiring for certain job roles purposely because they don't want, in their mind, they think, well, this is a much more automatable job. And which means that if you lead with your job title, you don't know whether or not that person you're talking to is kind of maybe pigeonholing you a little bit too much. Of course, I'm not saying you don't talk about your job title, but just to not lead with it, not be that like, that's who you are. I'm a program manager, I'm a PM, and instead flip it and talk about what did you solve and why did that matter? So instead of when you're writing your resume or your LinkedIn accomplishments or just creating this narrative, instead of starting with like the projects you worked on or the responsibilities you had, start with the problems you solved and just write just scribble them down. What are the 5 toughest problems you solved in your last job? And don't worry too much. This is where, and I'll share a little bit, but like Gemini, ChatGPT can be very helpful, but try to think of the things that were quite complex, right? Or what were the complex parts about those problems? Usually it's conflict with humans. It's ambiguity of like, should we even do this? Is it good for users? Is it good for our clients or our business? Or extreme risk, right? Like there could be some regulatory change that happens that will shift the entire landscape, and I'm not sure if we should do it. But that's the really interesting stuff that companies need to hire people to do those things. Like that is not what they can outsource to an agent. So how can you write your story about the problems you solved in a way that highlights the unique value you brought that clearly a model doesn't do independently? And then again, talk about the problems you solved and the impact of those solutions, not the tasks, because the tasks can be done by operational machines over time. So that's the first area of focus, and then the second related. This is not a perfect math equation, but for most jobs, about 95% of what we do is not our special sauce. It is really good work that other people could do as well. So for example, if you are really excellent at crafting great presentations, like really, well thought out and very compelling, that's wonderful. That's kind of a commodity, that's becoming more and more of a commodity to create a really compelling presentation. At some point, that maybe used to be very much a special sauce, or really good at spreadsheets, right? That used to be something that you could really market in the job, in a job search. That's dead. So what is the 5%? What is the thing that you do incredibly well as a skill, and I'll give some examples, that is not easy to replicate by anybody, let alone an agent or a model. So for example, like navigating teams and motivating them through change. That's a really tough skill. I don't know if any of you know too many leaders who did that well during when AI was coming to a boom or through layoffs. Most leaders were pretty terrible at motivating teams through disruption, but there are a few out there who are excellent at it. And so how do you, if you are one of those leaders, how do you harness that? Because that is rare. Similarly, like if you're in some kind of negotiating role, high stakes negotiations are just, not something commonplace that most people can do, but that is special sauce that you can really market as a differentiator in your 5%. Mentoring top talent. I know of some engineers out there, some engineering leads, where really what they're good at, yes, they can code, yes, they're great and very creative in their engineering work, but really what differentiates them is the talent that they've mentored and the other engineers they brought through the chain. Again, that's a big differentiator that companies look for, because they need that kind of behavior, not the more systematized behavior. So spending some time on what is that 5%, that's step one, but also how do you get better at the 5%? Because that's your special sauce. And if you can't, if you're not honing that craft, then you're going to get worse at it over time. So knowing what it is, and then maybe using that as your way to connect with your network and with others, thinking through who are the people who would value that from me, or that they are also very good at that, and then we can share, ideas and perspectives, maybe different perspective on it. Really, really critical. Oh yeah, sure. Thanks, DP. And then lastly in this section, and this is very near and dear to my heart because obviously I'm a bit biased. This is the approach that really helped me the past 2 years, is to build a portfolio career approach of your assets versus hedging all your bets and all your salary, all your identity on one place. And I feel strongly about this, but of course, history will be the teller of this. But I think the days where you go to school, you get educated, you get a job at some company, and you work there for many years, and you go up the chain. You get promoted, you become manager, director, VP, blah blah blah, and then you retire. I think those days are dead, and I think they're going to continue to get less. They're going to look less like that, the kind of the linear path. I think it's going to look much more nuanced, at least for now. It might shift to ebb and flow, but I'm not seeing that pattern as much as I used to. And I venture to guess, similar to you, that you're not, that path has become in threat, in most big companies, not just even in tech. So then with that in mind, how do you shift to putting all your eggs in one, corporate role, from thinking of it as a portfolio? If you've got your anchor role, so this role, whatever your next role is, your main job, and you love it, and you dedicate time, it should be a job you love, and you dedicate time to it. But then you also have what I call a personal brand engine, where back to the 5%, what you do really, really well, and the problems you've solved, how do you turn that into a space for you to share? It doesn't need to generate income, to be clear. It can be your content channel, it could be a Substack, it could be a YouTube channel, whatever it is, but it's something that's yours, that doesn't die. You can't get laid off from it. It's you. But how do you think in that way of like a portfolio? And that might be where you spend more time when you are not in column A, in pillar A. It could be something you spend very little time for months at a time, but you have it there, and you're ready to work on it. And then finally, pillar C, which is a longer term bet. So this could be you advising a startup, or you angel investing, thinking about the world you want to live in, 20 years from now or 30 years from now, and spending a portion of your time on something a bit more long term. I love the Bill Gates quote that we tend to overestimate what we can get done in 1 year, but we dramatically underestimate what we can get done in 10 years. And I think the pillar C resonates with me there, that there are so many things that I started years ago thinking, oh, like, this is not, I don't know where this is going to go. But then it ended up actually becoming something quite meaningful to me. But it took years because it was a baby. I only contributed 5% of my time, and I still only do. But it can give you that sense of control, back to that feeling, and a sense of you're doing something for the long run versus, I'm only here for the next year, 2 years, 3 years. So I definitely encourage this way of thinking to, again, remove that sense of all my eggs are in my job basket. With that, I'll just share a couple of other tools that, we'll be sharing the recording, so you can always come back to these. But everything I said about AI, that like, how do you differentiate yourself? It's also the best tool to help you, right? So it's both. I mentioned the value narrative. This is where I would highly recommend to tailor your narrative depending on the audience you're talking to, online, offline, etc., using your favorite LLM, Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever it is, to ask. So you have you work on your narrative, and that's something you can obviously use these tools, but I would highly recommend you do spend a lot of your own time thinking through the narrative because it's quite personal. But then the best use I've had with these tools is tailoring it to the audience, to LinkedIn, to how do I make this 30 seconds? How do I make this a better fit for an email communication? So it's incredibly, incredibly helpful for that kind of thing. Secondly, like test run. I think this is something I see so many clients I work with, they underuse Gemini Live or conversational AI to test your narrative. And it does take a bit of time to coach the prompt, right? With, or coach the model with like, who is the person listening? Because it really is a lot better if you can be clear on like, I'm a senior hiring manager at a Series C startup, and I'm worried about over hiring, whatever, program managers. So if you can give it that level of specificity in your prompt, it will listen for the right framing and the right words that might be the best or the worst. But I highly recommend practicing with a model. You can do it with friends and family too, but they don't listen as well, sadly, as Gemini Live, at least for me, because it can hear intonation, it can hear pauses, it can hear so much that we tend to overlook. And lastly, I mentioned the pillars. I think for pillar B, if you're reading that and you're thinking like, I don't know about that, I don't want to create, like creating content sounds such a pain and it will take so much time. I actually use an agent that I built on Zapier to help come up with content ideas based on what's not in the market. And it's quite fun. Like, I think it's a great outlet for those of you that have a creative mind. And there's so many tools out there, including the suggestion to, really make it a bit easier on yourself versus starting from a blank sheet of paper every single time you have to think about it. So don't hesitate to use AI tools. I know you all are, but they can really be a power leg up. I do think this will still require you to have a lot of insight and creative control on your own narrative, because it is personal and it does require a lot of data. Last thing I'll say is working with a coach can be really valuable. This isn't self-promotion, I'll just say, because I'm not a career coach specifically, but there are many out there and they can be incredibly helpful with crafting your narrative. Also, there are interview coaches, right? All these things. And a lot of people will often say like, I don't know if I want to, that's an investment of time and money. I don't know if it's worth it. But, and I'll just flash up, like some people I've worked with, they've gotten a lot of value in working with a coach. And I'll say, I did not coach all these 3 people, but I'm sharing some anecdotes of people I've helped with or known. And yeah, I'll share Vikram. And I will say they've all had a very different journey. And I think that's the key thing I want to highlight here. There's no right way to approach, how do I look for a job? How fast? How should I think about it? And I obviously I'm not sharing personal information here, just the first letters of these people's names, and then the emotion that I most associate with them based on how they showed up to most of our discussions. But it looked different for each person. So for the first person who was laid off in 2021, they actually ended up taking more of a portfolio career approach in the long run, because that was right for them. They didn't want to go back to a kind of full-time job. So they took on fractional work as well as consulting for themselves. And they actually are doing college counseling, which this person loves. The second person, the Ennui, took a bit more time off with family, because that was important to the person. And then actually did take on a new role at a startup. And it went pretty badly. It was a bad year. The startup founder was difficult to work with. Even though this person had a clear non-negotiable and priorities list, it was all very well done. But he couldn't predict that the startup CEO would not be as easy to work with as he thought. But now this person's in a brand new role as of a few months ago, and they're loving it. And they would never have gotten to this new role if they didn't have that difficult startup experience, because that really told a better story about their ability to take on this new role. So, again, like there's a light after the tunnel. And then the last person I'll share here, which was back in 2019, took even longer, took 6 months to process, and then primarily network, and found a role that they've stayed in until now at a big tech company. But now they're looking again, and I think that experience in 2019 has helped them feel a bit more confident in how they're going to approach this new chapter, because they went through it. So despite the pain you might be going through now, it can actually really help you for the future, because this happens time and time again. Okay, I know we're at time, and I want to leave time for questions. I'll just leave it with this quote. This is one of my favorite songs, just highlighting that there's a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. Our instinct when we see cracks in our life is to super glue and cover it up and hide it, but actually that can deprive us of new information and insight that comes in. So I would encourage everyone, don't rush to super glue the crack, because it can give you gets. All right, let me quick fire answer questions. Go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you, Sarah. And maybe I'll go through 2 things before we take the questions, and we can stop the recording. Sure. Then would that be okay, Sarah?
Of course.
So Sarah's email, sarah@anbara, ANBARA.com. For those who are actually watching this later, I'm going to do a quick demo of items that Sarah had mentioned, how to find networks. For those who are Xooglers, you should have been on Xoogler.key.ai already. Go through this directory and see a few thousand people are in it. I clicked on Adam Saar's name. You can sort of see when they joined Google, what teams they were on, and specifically what he's looking to give back. Founding companies, fundraising, CPG algorithm. So people actually said they're raising their hand, they want to give back to the community. So lean in, they already leaned in, so take advantage of their their offer. For those who aren't Xooglers, can try unlock.key.ai. It's a more open directory for that. And the last thing I'll show you is I just started this Berkeley Mentors community yesterday morning, and with 22 sort of members of the community. So you have a ton of people in your own networks to form these communities. So start thinking about it, and clearly if you can reach out to me, Chris@key.ai, if you have any questions on how to do that. But as Sarah said, it is uncomfortable to perhaps take during this time, and a bit awkward, especially I need something, I need people, but maybe form your own community if you want to give back, and you know who wants to raise their hand to help you. And on that note, Sarah, let's stop the recording. Really appreciate you giving this hour to present. We'll do more private Q&A now, and reach out to Sarah and myself if any other questions, or want to offer more time to present your own story to the Xoogler community or others. Thank you for stopping the recording, Sarah.